Welcome to National Eyes. Please subscribe and hit the bell icon for more breaking updates. In a stunning and unprecedented decision, the U.S. Supreme Court has struck down the Trump-era tariffs, sending shockwaves through the highest levels of government and industry. This landmark ruling marks a pivotal moment in American legal and economic history, as the justices have upended years of protectionist trade policies that have shaped the nation's economic landscape throughout this year and beyond. The tariffs, once seen as a shield for American manufacturers and workers, are now history, leaving businesses, workers, and consumers to navigate a rapidly changing environment. The decision has immediate and far-reaching consequences for industries that have relied on these protections. The ruling instantly sent shockwaves through Wall Street, global markets, and Main Street businesses alike. Investors scrambled to reassess their positions, while small business owners and multinational corporations alike braced for a new era of uncertainty and opportunity. At the heart of the case was a fundamental question: whether a president can unilaterally impose sweeping tariffs by declaring a national emergency, bypassing the traditional checks and balances of Congress. The court's answer? A resounding no, reaffirming Congress's exclusive authority to levy taxes and regulate trade, and drawing a clear line on the limits of executive power. This decision not only resets U.S. trade relations with key partners around the globe, but also challenges the very scope of presidential emergency powers, setting a precedent that could impact future administrations. The immediate reaction: celebration from businesses and importers who have long argued that tariffs raised costs and stifled competition, and a sense of relief among global trading partners. But there's also anxiety from government officials now facing massive financial fallout, as billions in tariff revenue vanish overnight and budget plans are thrown into disarray. As the dust settles, the world is left to grapple with new questions about the future of trade, law, and economic policy. Economists and policymakers everywhere are now rethinking strategies in light of this dramatic shift. In the coming hours, we'll break down what this means for you, the nation, and the world, exploring the ripple effects of this judicial earthquake and what lies ahead for the global economy. To understand today's ruling, let's revisit the origins of the Trump tariffs. These policies didn't emerge in a vacuum. They were the result of mounting political pressure, economic anxieties, and a rapidly shifting global landscape. The administration's approach marked a dramatic departure from decades of trade policy, signaling a new era of economic nationalism. In early 2025, the administration imposed sweeping tariffs using emergency powers, sidestepping Congress and traditional trade negotiations. This bold move was justified as a necessary response to what officials described as an urgent national crisis, allowing the executive branch to act swiftly and unilaterally. The first wave targeted Canada, Mexico, and China, citing their failure to curb fentanyl trafficking. Officials argued that these countries weren't doing enough to stop the flow of illegal drugs into the United States, and tariffs were framed as both punishment and leverage. The second wave was even broader, a baseline 10% tariff on nearly all imports, escalating for countries with large trade deficits. This expansion affected everything from electronics to clothing and sent shockwaves through global supply chains, leaving businesses scrambling to adapt. Critics argued the International Emergency Economic Powers Act was never meant to authorize such broad taxation. Only Congress can tax. Legal scholars and lawmakers from both parties questioned whether the executive branch had overstepped its constitutional authority, igniting a fierce debate in Washington. The economic impact was immediate: higher prices for consumers, disrupted supply chains, and mounting costs for businesses. Everyday Americans felt the pinch at the checkout line, while manufacturers faced delays and shortages of critical components. Projections showed American households could pay up to $2,800 more in 2025 alone. For many families, this meant tough choices about spending, saving, and making ends meet in an already uncertain economy. Small businesses in particular struggled to absorb the sudden spike in costs. Many were forced to raise prices, cut staff, or even close their doors as the ripple effects of the tariffs spread across communities nationwide. Amid economic pain and constitutional questions, a coalition of importers and business groups took the fight to court. Their lawsuits challenged the administration's authority and demanded a return to checks and balances in trade policy. That legal battle set the stage for today's historic Supreme Court decision, a ruling that could reshape the balance of power between Congress and the president and redefine how America approaches trade for years to come. The legal fight began in the U.S. Court of International Trade, a specialized federal court in New York City that handles cases involving international trade and customs laws. This court, often overlooked by the public, became the unlikely stage for a battle with enormous national consequences. Here, a coalition of importers and business owners argued that the tariffs were not just a financial burden, but an illegal tax imposed by the executive branch without the explicit approval of Congress. They claimed the president had bypassed the constitutional process, putting their livelihoods and the broader economy at risk. In a landmark decision, the court sided with the plaintiffs, ruling that the president had overstepped his authority by enacting sweeping tariffs under the guise of emergency powers. The verdict sent shockwaves through the business community and the halls of government alike. The Trump administration quickly appealed the ruling, determined to defend its policy, but the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals upheld the lower court's decision, declaring the tariffs an unconstitutional use of emergency powers and reinforcing the limits of executive authority. With billions of dollars already collected from importers, the stakes soared even higher. The Treasury Department warned that refunding the money could disrupt government finances, potentially triggering a fiscal crisis and impacting federal programs. Facing mounting pressure, the administration urgently petitioned the Supreme Court, arguing that the tariffs were essential for protecting national security and advancing U.S. foreign policy interests. They insisted that reversing the policy would weaken America's position on the global stage. The justices agreed to hear the case, setting the stage for a dramatic final showdown that would determine the fate of the tariffs and the scope of presidential power. By late August, over $159 billion in tariffs had been collected, with the potential liability ballooning to as much as $1 trillion if the policy continued unchecked. The sheer scale of the financial risk was unprecedented in modern trade history. Small businesses from across the country testified before Congress, describing the harm inflicted by the tariffs, lost contracts, layoffs, and shuttered storefronts. For many, the outcome of the case would determine whether they could survive. Meanwhile, government officials warned of fiscal chaos if refunds were ordered, arguing that such a move could destabilize the federal budget and ripple through the entire economy. The case became a high-stakes clash over the limits of presidential power, the authority of Congress, and the economic future of the country. The eyes of the nation and the world were watching. Today, after months of legal wrangling and public debate, the Supreme Court delivered its verdict, bringing clarity to a deeply divided nation. The consequences are immediate and far-reaching, sending shockwaves through global markets and reshaping the landscape of American trade and executive power for years to come. On October 28, 2025, the Supreme Court, in a 6-3 decision, struck down the Trump tariffs. Chief Justice Roberts wrote that while the president can regulate commerce during emergencies, only Congress can impose taxes. The ruling draws a clear line. Regulation is not taxation, and the Constitution reserves taxing power for Congress alone. The decision immediately voids the tariffs and obligates the government to refund over $159 billion to importers. This landmark ruling redefines the limits of presidential power and sets a new standard for economic policy. The Supreme Court's decision triggered a surge in global markets. Stocks for import-heavy companies soared, and Wall Street cheered the end of tariff uncertainty. The US dollar dipped as traders braced for the government's massive refund liability. For consumers, the ruling promises gradual relief. Prices on imported goods should fall as supply chains normalize. Economists predict lower inflation and potential savings for families, though the benefits will take months to materialize. The Treasury now faces the daunting task of refunding billions, likely increasing government debt and straining finances. Customs brokers and importers must navigate a complex refund process, doubling workloads overnight. Internationally, trading partners welcome the decision, seeing it as a chance to reset strained relations. Some U.S. industries, once shielded by tariffs, now face renewed foreign competition. The global trading landscape is shifting, fast. Politically, the ruling has split Washington. Democrats and moderate Republicans hail it as a victory for the Constitution and a check on executive overreach. House Speaker Jeffries calls it a landmark day, restoring Congress's power of the purse. Trump and his allies condemn the decision, arguing it weakens America's ability to fight unfair trade and protect workers. The debate over presidential power and trade policy is set to dominate upcoming elections. Internationally, allies like Canada and the EU celebrate the move, hoping for normalized trade and stronger partnerships. China responds cautiously, signaling hope for more predictable U.S. policy. The ruling empowers pro-trade coalitions and forces a realignment within both parties. The future of American trade policy will now be shaped in Congress, not by executive order. For small businesses, the end of the tariffs is a lifeline, but the road to recovery is steep. Many lack the resources to navigate the complex refund process, facing mountains of paperwork and offers to sell their claims at a loss. The administrative burden threatens to dilute the relief intended by the court's decision. For households, the tariffs acted as a hidden tax, raising prices on everyday goods. Families felt the squeeze at the checkout line, from school supplies to groceries. The ruling promises gradual relief, but prices won't drop overnight. For many, this is validation after months of hardship, a chance to rebuild and recover. The challenge now, ensuring the benefits reach those who need them most. Legal and economic experts agree. This ruling is a turning point for American governance. Constitutional scholars say the court has drawn a bright line. Presidents can't bypass Congress to impose taxes. Economists see long-term gains, lower costs, more efficient trade, and a boost to growth, despite the short-term fiscal hit. The decision restores predictability to U.S. trade policy, encouraging investment and stable international negotiations. Yet, some warn that removing tariffs takes away a tool to combat unfair foreign practices. Issues like subsidized industries and intellectual property theft remain unresolved. Without tariffs, Congress must develop new strategies to protect American workers and industries. The ruling forces future administrations to work with Congress on major economic policy. The U.S. now faces the challenge of balancing open trade with effective protections. The next steps will shape America's economic future. The Supreme Court's decision closes one chapter but opens many more. The immediate challenge: how will the Treasury manage the massive refund process and its impact on government finances? Congress must now decide whether to limit presidential emergency powers and address the root causes of trade imbalances. Internationally, the U.S. has a chance to repair alliances and reset negotiations. The removal of tariffs could usher in a new era of cooperation or expose new vulnerabilities. The coming months will reveal whether this legal reset leads to a more stable global trading system. The aftershocks of this judicial earthquake are only beginning.